Welcome to Habitats and Interactions, Year 7 Ecology. So ecology is one of the branches of biology. So we're looking at a little habitat here, maybe a microhabitat. We're just looking at some nice coral here. There's a little fishy living under there. Quite often you'll see schooling fish around a little habitat like this one. We've got a bit of swell, a bit of surf coming in over the top. We'll talk about how those sorts of factors impact ecosystems as we go. The link to the Australian Curriculum Outcomes is in the description, so you can find it there. The main outcome is talking about the interactions between organisms and how they can be described, looking at food chains and food webs. Human activity can also affect these interactions. I go a little bit deeper than just food chains and food webs, looking at interactions. If you want to go through all of these, go right ahead. So you can either go to the SCARSA website or you can pause it and read them here. So what my class will be doing is we'll be looking at this video to start off with. There is a link to this video. It's the Nalu Marine Life documentary. It's one that I made earlier this year. What it is basically a footage I've collected from a place called Nalu in Western Australia. It's where the desert meets the sea, but you'll hear that in there. Living things are organisms. So that's what the word organism means. It means it's a living. Here's some examples. So plants, fungi, animals, and bacteria. They're all types of organisms. There's a little bit more than that, but we're not going to worry about that. So habitat is where an organism lives. And of course, habitats are really diverse. We have life living pretty much in every little nook and cranny on our planet. We have a dingo. So this dingo's up at Exmouth. She was quite a beautiful girl. Rarely get opportunities, or used to rarely get opportunities to take pictures and to have a look at dingoes. So I was pretty happy with the opportunity I had there. So this is the kind of habitat or ecosystem that this dingo is living in. So this is the Cape Range National Park. So what organisms need in habitats? Some of them pretty straightforward. You should know these already. So they need food, water, air. Now it's not just oxygen. There's other components in air that organisms need. They need shelter, a suitable temperature, and they need someone to breed with. So we can see this crocodile here. It's a freshwater crocodile, lives in a river system, so it does not live in an estuary or anywhere near the ocean because they don't really like the salt water very much. I'm sure they would die, but over time they're probably going to make them a little bit sick. One of the things about crocodiles is we only really find them in northern Australia. And the reason for that is anywhere south of about, even Exmouth is too cold for crocodiles. They have been found as far south as Coral Bay. However, that's really, really unusual. Not a freshie. It would have been a salty travelling that far. Probably got confused or had something wrong with it in order for it to go there. So usually we don't find them in even as far south as the Pilbara. So what they need in a habitat, there's two main areas. So biotic factors, and they're living factors, and abiotic factors, so they're your non-living things. Here's a white-bellied sea eagle, and that picture was taken right next to where this fatty was hanging out. That's a massive freshwater crocodile. It's one that's about as big as a salty, as an adult salty. It was huge and fat, and we can see that it could hardly even get up, dragging its belly along the ground up there. So biotic factors in ecosystems include symbiosis. Now symbiosis is a relationship between organisms. We'll look at that shortly. So you might think soil is strange to belong in the biotic factors. It's not just dirt. Soil is made up of sand, silt, and clay. Yes, those things are not alive. However, in order to make that soil, otherwise it's just sediment. So in order to make that soil, we need lots of living things, lots of things that are decaying, decomposers in there, worms, and worms are the least of the organisms that are in there. Soil's full of it. And also in soil you might find some fungi living underground, all that sort of stuff. Food is a biotic factor, disease, dead organisms, and waste. All biotic factors. Abiotic factors include air and water quality. So altitude can play a part. Might be something you haven't thought about before, but if something lives up in the mountains, there's less oxygen up there, there are lower temperatures up there. So altitude can play a part. Depending on where you are on Earth, different climates, so it could be cloud cover and things like that, limiting sunlight, but more a case of whether you're near the equator or not. So at the equator, the sunlight's pretty direct coming from the sun, so it hits you square on. Whereas if you're in Antarctica or the Arctic or northern or far north or far south, the sunlight's coming at an angle where you're not getting as intense a sunlight as you do right on the equator. It's kind of spread out a little bit more, which is why it's colder. It tends to be colder in those sort of places. The other factor is that it's more consistent at the equator, whereas you have more distinct seasons to the far north and south. Heat results in temperature, so heat's coming from that sunlight as well, but heat comes from chemical reactions and things like that. Rainfall and flood, some organisms rely on the flood. So soil type, okay, so it's not the soil itself's biotic, considered biotic, but the type of soil. So whether it's got how much clay, how much silt, how much sand in it is a factor. Some organisms grow better in sandy soils, some organisms grow better in silty soils. Nutrients and minerals, and oxygen availability. Lightning, wind, waves, fire and humidity. Here's some lightning. That's a picture from up in the Pilbara. I was driving through in 2016 and took that picture. There's a place called Hamersley Gorge in Karijini National Park. Some beautiful folds there, but looking at the rock and the water in that. So an adaptation is a feature that's developed over time in an organism. It's part of evolution, and the adaptation is something that can physically or behaviorally help it, or maybe not. So if it's a behavioral physiological adaptation that doesn't help it, it either goes away over time, over generation after generation, or that organism just doesn't make it. You can see as a kangaroo, kangaroos have some interesting adaptations. They have very long legs, long tail, very heavy tail, and little front legs that kind of act like they're more arms than legs, aren't they? Kangaroos have very large ears. Their ears can turn around. So it's pretty common in mammals. Here's a few sharks. We can see their adaptations, long, slick bodies with fins helping them control their direction and making them a bit more streamlined. Long tail. They've also got gills. So they're all adaptations. This picture's here as well because of the behavioural adaptation. And we can see that these reef sharks, it's hard to see, but there's actually 6 in this picture, that they're all hunting together. And for sharks to hunt as a group, they're far more successful than if they're hunting as an individual animal. It's much easier to escape from one than it is to escape from a whole group. Less chance. We've got the symbiotic behaviours we're going to get to. Being nocturnal is a behavioural adaptation, so coming out at night, not during the day. The ability to communicate. So whales, in particular, have a pretty awesome communication method that can go for tens of kilometres. They can communicate across the ocean. There's lots of non-verbal ways of communicating. I think we can argue that whales use verbal communication. It's a language. Being identified as languages. Different species, different groups within species have different language. This octopus here, this octopus is communicating that it's annoyed, which is why it's bright red. So organisms also use teamwork. Our species is certainly pretty good at that. Other species have hierarchical systems. It's basically anything that lives as a community or a group together need to rely on teamwork. If you think about a school of fish, that's a pretty cool example of teamwork. It doesn't just have to be the same species, it can be between a few species. So you could have teamwork between a wolf and a bear, for instance. It seems like a bit of an odd couple, but bears and wolves can work together in order to take down prey. Lots of organisms are able to produce their own light, which is quite interesting. Sometimes they'll manipulate the light that is there in order to deceive or fool prey. Marine animals do that quite a fair bit. So using tools, it was once thought that only humans can use tools, but that's not right. Heaps of animals, heaps of organisms use tools. So stealth or ambush is pretty interesting here. Plenty of organisms hide and wait. So snakes, crocodiles are an ambush predator. Some particular species of sharks are ambush predators. A lot of insects are ambush predators. Things that make it fast or agile, so size and strength are physiological adaptations. So some animals are incredibly big in order to protect themselves. Some are quite small for the same reason. Being small could be an advantage, particularly if you're on an elephant on a small island. So there's, I don't think they're called dwarf elephants, but there are some very small elephants on this one particular island, how they've evolved to become small because of where they're living. They're not in the open plains or in the jungle. Aposematism is an interesting one. So this little eel over here is using aposematism, so it looks like a snake, but it isn't. That's just a harmless little eel, but it looks like a banded sea snake. And because of that, predators don't attack it. Storing nutrients, so physiological adaptation, storing nutrients as fat. A lot of organisms, particularly again in the ocean, use toxicity or poison. So being poisonous means that if something eats you, it gets sick. Toxicity is more like venom and things like that. So a snake is toxic, it's actually not poisonous. And a lot of rays have spines on them that have a toxin in them, which can make you a bit sick. So you don't want to step too much on rays. This is a camouflaged ray as well. That's called a fiddler ray. They're quite beautiful. That was down in Albany, but you can see a fair few of them. A good place to see them is under Busselton Jetty. So camouflage. I like this picture. So you've got 5 organisms there. See if you can see them. I can see them all really easily because I've seen these pictures so many times. But there's a couple of still I've got to look. This one in particular, there's a lizard there. Here is its head. Here's its front leg, and here is its body. It's camouflaging as some kind of lichen there. It's pretty amazing. So this is a moth that's camouflaged to look like a leaf. Now this isn't folded over or anything like that. That's just a pattern on a flat wing. Here we have a caterpillar, brilliantly camouflaged. So here's its stripe down its body, and we have these appendages coming off. I would say they're not legs, they're just kind of appendages. So there's a lizard up here, disguised to look like leaves, and this is an owl. It's right in the middle. So it's Eliza here, and here's its beak down there, and its body. Here's a leg.